Welcome, everyone. It's another episode of addressing the elephant. Wow, addressing the elephant in the room, and we're going to take it one bite at a time, as usual. And we are, of course, with amazing co-host Jason Safford. Educate me. First of all, we're going to do an in-house addressing the elephant. My name is Coach April Ballestero. I am the founder of One Light Ahead and blessed to be in partnership with creating all kinds of fun stuff with Jason. And we get to address our own in-house elephants today. And where do you want to start with that, Jason?
So I'm going to actually first back up and say you are my magnificent co-host because you called me fabulous. So I've got to
Love it.
pay back the respect. But number two, for our listeners, to let them know that we decided that this was an opportunity for us to connect with them directly and let them understand and appreciate even more what we are really about and what the elephant in the room is, why we put it together, and really what the opportunity is for them going forward. So, real quickly, and then I'll let you put me on the hot seat first. I have no problem going first. I always like to volunteer, as you know. But
Of course I do. Love it.
yeah, so the elephant in the room was a program that April actually came up with, and I had the opportunity to watch her go through it. And in watching her, I said, we could do a podcast with this. And being the business creative mind that I am, and also somewhat of an entertainer, and
I don't know what you're talking about, Jason.
April learned today that I do everything with a smile. So that
Right,
that
literally.
that is exactly how the addressing the elephant in the room became a podcast. And I just said, yeah, let's do it. And the goal was to, interview business leaders and community leaders with the issue that they knew was most apparent to everybody in the room, but nobody really wanted to address, whether it was a matter of not being comfort, or it was fear, or it was the fact that it was just assumed. And, why was that? And we've had some fabulous guests in the process. And as we go forward with this podcast, and we really have gotten our feet under us, and now we know what we're doing. Um,
We're getting it better and better every week, right? Well, especially when we can speak really well.
so now that we have the comfort between each other, and really the dynamic, we now know how we want to help our listeners going forward, so that, exactly as you said, and credit to April, bite the elephant one, or eat the elephant one bite at a time. So now that we've addressed it, now we're really trying to stalk it and make sure that we don't let the elephant out of the room without getting our bites in.
I love the way you just wrapped that up perfectly. And the one item I would add into that is that each guest gets to pick their own elephant. We don't give them any for we let them digest it. We'll have a conversation, help them prepare. Yet we ask them with how they're equipped for it and how they get to suggest or advise adding a bite, right?
That's exactly.
So, and we're going to get to do that to ourselves today and our own elephants. And Jason, you get to start us off with what elephant do you want to create conversation around today
Okay, so
first?
my elephant in the room is around executive leadership, because that's what I coach, and really being able to communicate your vision. And I really say it as communication and vision, because it's really a two-way street. And that's the biggest challenge as an executive, is that we often think that what we're saying is loud and clear and everybody should have their marching orders. But oftentimes it's not being received that way at all. And we're not doing a 360 view on ourselves in terms of how we're really attending to our team and our external and internal environment. And I think that our biggest challenge is the fact that we fail to remember that even if we have a tribe within our internal team, they have their own issues going on. So even though we think that we're communicating something clearly and they're saying, yeah, let's go, they might walk out of the room and really not know what to do next. And part of it is even though they're a part of the tribe and, they're trying to put on their game face, they're struggling with things that they feel that they can't ask questions. And it may not be a wall that you're putting up at all. It may be just a difference in energy or vibration on that particular day. And it also may be that they're not resonating with you because you are in a place that, everything seems like it's going right for you and it's not going right for them. And that could be, part of the issue too, is that, whether you are happy or not, what you're communicating lacks empathy, simply because you're coming from this place where everything is confident and sure and very clear in your mind. For the other person, that might be something that they envy or are jealous of. And so therefore they're not ready to receive that message at that time. And that's one of the biggest challenges I think that executives have, is being able to sort of step down off of their pedestal and realize that somebody may not be in the right frame of mind. It doesn't mean that they're not a valuable employee or a committed person, but what they're going through, they're just not receiving your message at that moment or time. And how are you making or accounting for that in the way that uh, you make sure that they really understand and they're going forward? And part of it is that you need to do a follow up. So once you communicate a vision, how are you following up? How are you making sure that your team is plugged in?
Well, and Jason, I'm going to ask you a couple different questions about that to dive into that elephant for a minute. And because, normally you're the one that's, on the other end of that deeper dive.
That's right.
And the fun part is that we get to do this together, is the awareness of, uh, you said, it's for an executive to step off their platform. And I think that's something to really dive a little bit deeper into, is I think so many executives have this vision in their mind, there's communication, this language, there's etc., that they believe that they've broadcast, they've verbalized, they've documented, etc. And yet their perception of that documentation, that communication, is coming from one perspective, and the perspective of everyone else around them may not be digested the same way in those bite concepts, right? And therefore, there's some multiple opportunities. So the question I'm going to ask you with that is, when you say step off the platform, how would you recommend, from your own experience and your own journey, because you're well equipped for this conversation, and your own journey of how you've learned how to step off that pedestal, if you will, and reach out and ask the questions and engage to truly see where understanding is, where language is, where buy-in is.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing I'll tell you is that it starts with humility.
Mm-hmm.
The toughest thing is to know that you've said all the right things and to have the majority of people receive it with no problem
Mm-hmm.
and realize that it's the minority that you need to spend more time with, not just because they need it, but because you need it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a part of um, your overall impact. And we do this, whether we realize it or not, in terms of business, in our marketing and sales efforts externally. We fail to realize that we need to do it internally, that when you're selling your vision to your organization and your individuals, that it's the same process that you would go about selling externally. And by that I mean that you're selling your vision, but you want your customers to feel like they're the ones making the choice to buy in. And when you do it externally, you do it through all these different platforms, and you have lots of different resources that you're willing to spend money on to engage with prospects and people to learn what they really want and what their your pain points are. But we don't do that with our staff the same way. And we don't remember that our staff are people too, whether they're contractors, full-time or part-time employees,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the challenges in their life. Additional to that, I think that the fact that whatever you cannot provide as a business in terms of benefits and incentives and paid time off, all of that is superfluous to how you treat your people in terms of just following up with them. And the more that a person feels like you care about whether or not they're really receiving your information the way that you want it to be received, and you're following up with them to make sure that they are getting it the way that you want it and not the way they perceive it. Because how often do we hear in a conversation, somebody said that I said this, and the other person says, well, I heard this.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually do a phenomenal job of that. When you're leading and coaching, you listen to somebody and you say, if I heard you correctly, this is what you just said. Am I correct? And you let that person decide whether or not they should agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very rare that, people do that. And it took me, you know, the better part of 18 or 19 years in business to really understand that. And then the most important thing was carrying that over to my personal relationships and realizing, you pointed something out about me that's very, very true and very important, is that the struggle that I have between empower and enable, I naturally am a fixer. You give me a business problem and I'm going to fix it for you. I can grow and scale any business to whatever level you need me to do. I can project manage anything. I can build a house from scratch. Whatever the problem is, I will find the best solution and the best way to do it and work on you with how we get that solution in place. My challenge is always that oftentimes I wind up taking on the responsibility and enabling you to do other things rather than empowering you by saying, okay, here's the solution. How are you going to fix it based on this solution? And that, has been something that, I've now written about in terms of how I do it for myself. And in the Breakthrough Principles and Winning with Exceptionalism, the book, it's
Mm-hmm.
all about the fact of, taking accountability for yourself first and then asking the questions of everybody around you and making sure that you're getting all the right information you need, as well as that they're getting all the information that they need from you the way that you want it done. And the recipe is simple. Unfortunately, learning how to bake it right is the ongoing challenge I think we all have, had to endure.
I love how you said that in regards to the recipe, is that our opportunity is to recognize, and I want to dig one more last dive into that before we turn the tables, is you said, you know that awareness of looking in the mirror, and thank you for being so vulnerable with that for our audience. Is, and I'm sure I will have my own turn with that. Yet the opportunity of what uh, I want to make sure our audience hears, and then for you to dive in and give them that extra bite, is really looking in the mirror and saying, how am I sharing it so where people hear it, and not taking it on for them, yet empowering them to move into it, and yet also verifying that there's a resonation of knowing that you're showing up authentically, truly invested in the relationship, invested in the results, and invested in the success for everyone, not within only a personal agenda. And I think that's where a lot of people can get hung up on, uh, in the executive world, because they're operating off of what result they're being by their executives giving them, or their their expectations of whatever language they've got going on in their mind, that is saying, this is the result I need to, instead of just being present in that moment
Yeah.
and truly resonating and engaging. So anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, and thank you for asking. So, I think the secret, and this is a secret sauce,
Mm-hmm.
is it's the hidden connection between the mind and the heart, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll include the stomach in that, in terms of the fact that your gut feeling is always your best guide.
Mm-hmm.
But the connection between the mind and the heart is, again, at the executive level, we're very, very focused on making sure that our vision is communicated in the most precise and effective way, that people have their marching orders, and it's
Mm-hmm.
logical, and it's incredibly logical. And that's what I love about strategic planning, is that it's based on
Mm-hmm.
logic. And again, I told you I'm a fixer. I am an incredibly logical person. However, we are not the military, even though we love to give marching orders, and we have our generals and admirals and captains of industry to put in charge of our vision. These are people, and it's the heart that we have to think about. How are they receiving this
Mm-hmm.
from me? That's first thing. In other words, my particular visage is going to impact people differently. And the words coming out of my mouth based on my visage are going to, affect people in a certain way, where they might look at me and say, I don't like his face, or I don't like his tone, or I don't like the fact that he's a man. So there are all sorts of things that we're not taking into account when we put this out there, and how they're receiving it. But the second thing is that we don't know what's going on in their world unless we ask. So the
Mm-hmm.
follow-up of making sure, the accountability of asking everybody, did I do a good job of communicating my vision? I was confident that I said it clearly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that because I said it clearly, I said it clearly for me.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say it clearly for you? Did you receive the information the way that I needed you to? And one of the biggest mistakes I think that we make is we don't do that in the meeting or in the encounter. We don't ask them, did what I say come across clearly? And oftentimes somebody will say, yes. Okay, could you tell me what I said,
Mm-hmm.
in the way that you understood it, just to make sure that I'm um, confident that because right now I'm not confident that you received it the way. And that's humility, to be able to say to somebody, I'm not confident that I said it in a way that you received it well.
And I would add one other factor to that, Jason, then you feel free to turn the table, is I would add what, Jason, what I heard, what I'm curious at, what resonated with you with what I said. And that way it opens up that heart conversation of,
That's a
you know,
full tactic to, yeah, say, what was it? What was the resonation, or what was the vibration that you felt as I spoke? Where did you connect with me? And
and some people may say, I didn't hear a word you said because you're a man, right? So,
to accept that. And that's the
right.
biggest, part of it, is being willing to accept somebody where they are, and then ask them, okay, how can I say this? Or, what do you need from me?
Who do you need to hear it from? Right.
You need in terms of, somebody else to deliver the message in a
Mm-hmm.
way that's going to get you going forward. And that's the humility, that once you connect the mind and the heart, it's like, okay, the most important thing here is that you get the impact that I need you to get from what I'm saying, that you can carry it forward, so that you're turning around and going the other way with a positive and meaningful responsibility and ownership. Because that's what we're really trying to do when we communicate our vision, is to help other people take ownership of that vision. So
the, the gift of engagement.
there.
And it leads perfectly where we're headed to start the wrap up process, because I know we want to be purposeful about our time as well.
That's right. So, Miss Ballesteros, what is your elephant in the room?
So the wonderful gift is that I'll take the S off the Ballestero. So when somebody goes looking for me, is I'll make sure to address that first, and then you know, ironically, we have a lot. We partner off of, or bounce well because we have a lot of the natural tendencies, and I fall into that fixer realm as well. And the same aspect, and that empower and enable is a very powerful thing I work on purposely. And yet my elephant is really the desire for people to understand and define community and invest in community. And that's why partnership is such a big deal for me. Why uh, you know, being able to create masterminds, create community, create events, create uh, a business and structure and places that we can really infuse people with the gift of learning and growing from each other, and moving forward is a very important awareness of the lack of or the opportunity for communicating that.
And in terms of community and partnership, what is the biggest obstacle for people really feeling a sense of community and partnership in your experience?
And it's so interesting. So the first immediate response that came up for that, without a whole lot of deep thought on that, is the awareness of so many people feel isolated, and yet they don't recognize that part of that isolation is by choice. And and so often people either feel like they don't want to bother people, or they don't. I hear that a lot in the coaching arena. I hear a lot of, well, people don't understand, or they don't want to commit, or, you know, especially when you get into the nonprofit world, they say the best form of leadership can be learning how to get volunteers to move forward and be engaged in the process, because they're doing it because of their belief in the cause, not because of any other so-called incentive aspect of that. And so I guess I know the opportunity is to recognize what value they derive from that community, and how they could best, how each of us can best honor that. And I've always been an individual that purposely leads different communities. And what I uncover more often than not is when I'm not being purposeful or consistent, that leadership in that leadership, or I take a break or whatever it may be, it just goes stagnant. And it amazes me how so many people allow everyone else to be the leader, and yet they want community.
Yeah, that's an incredible statement there, and that leads me to a question. And this is really sort of off base, but it is something that goes to the individual. Why is faith such a undervalued uh, part of relationship and partnership? People look at community and partnership based on what is it that you're doing for the bigger cause, or what are you doing together, but they don't look at the faith that they need to have in themselves and each other to make this work.
That was a very interesting perspective in regards to, and there's so many different things you said there. So I want to make sure to acknowledge the question, and then what I'm hearing from that question,
Hmm.
because if I'm hearing the question correctly, which is what I say, right, is the belief in self and belief in others, and then the faith of what you overall believe. So we go into that conversation of that filter system that we all operate of if it's a man, woman, religion, whatever it is that you so-called have a faith in. And the opportunity when you choose to have faith or belief in something or someone, and that does need to start with each individual, right? Of having the faith to recognize their skills, their gifts, their cause, their what they're called for, what their opportunity is to serve, etc. And then into the community aspect. And it's interesting, and I'll use an example of multiple communities that I get to lead, is what I watch, and I think you've experienced this and seen one of the communities you're in right now, is it takes a process for people to show up and trust each other. It takes a process for them to show up and believe they're going to give value. Why do I need to be in this community? Why do I need to be around these people? Why do I need to, what could I possibly learn from this other person? Even if they're not in my industry, they're not in the blah, 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 and having served building communities for so many years and watching, I mean, I went to one community and had 85 people on my roster and learned how to build community with them by just learning how to help them see value in each other, learning how to help them see value in themselves, learning how to help them see how they could grow and multiply from those values. So to go back to your question about faith, it's an internal question. It's an internal decision. It's an internal filter system that each of us get to choose. So to infuse that into another, and in the coaching world, I've heard this say for years, and I wholeheartedly believe it. When you can see yourself as well as I see you, then you're going to have a whole different interpretation. And that many coaches get to believe in their client long before they believe in themselves. Because I tell people all the time, my job is to become a mirror for you. My job is for you to give me enough permission for me to know you well enough to get in your mind, your heart, and your soul to be able to give back to you what I'm hearing and seeing, so you can start to decide whether or not that fits, whether or not I can see it from another perception. And I'm blessed to work with brand new executives to very high influential executives that have a huge amount of influence, that are making a huge amount of impact, and they give me permission to get in their mind, their heart and soul, and let them see their own faith, see their own commitment, see their own struggles and their own obstacles, and determine how they want to infuse that for themselves as well as others. And I'm not sure that I completely answered your question, and yet I think that really is a real scenario that's happening, and I thought it was an interesting question.
Yeah, and what it leads me to is, it sounds like the biggest challenge in terms of people being willing to let faith lead them in terms of community and partnership, because how do you really build community and partnership without faith? But it sounds like the obstacle is ego. And it's almost, you said, why is this? Why is this? Why, it sounds like a child almost, in the fact that, people want things to improve, but then at the same time, they're asking, why do I have to do anything in order for things to improve? So how much of ego is the obstacle in terms of community and partnership really developing successfully?
200% or more. Say that last part again.
Did I lead you on that question?
You sure did. Oh my goodness. And it's so funny. I remember a coach when I was first starting out, going full time on my own, and she called me up and she goes, "I want you to come work for me." And I said, "Great." And I said, "Tell me more. I'm always interested in joint partnerships." And she says, "Well, the first thing I need to know is that you're going to get over your ego before you decide to come work with me." And I'm like, "Tell me more. Educate me. My company does not have my name in my company. I'm just curious. Is that a reflection of ego?" And I thought about it, and I thought, and then I recognized that I would be unfair to anybody if I did not claim my own ego. I have plenty of my own ego, and more often than not, I could probably stumble right over it. Uh, and yet, and I think that's true for everybody. And yet, we don't want to own it. That there's been a journey, and I can't remember who sings the song, and I'm a big fan of songs, but there's I think it's called "Nobody," and it's a beautiful faith-based song about I'm learning how to be a nobody, trying to tell everybody about a somebody. And I'm going to leave it there so people have to go look it up. Yet,
Uh,
what's that?
it's a good job.
We're working at it. And I work to remind myself I'm the vessel. The gifting I have, the skills I have, the tools that I get to use to be a leader in a community by choice, by willingness to say there's opportunity for us all. I don't need it to be me being the so-called top. I've learned how to be protective. I've learned how to be a guardian. Yet I've also learned that we have a limited amount of time on this earth. We have a limited amount of time to make an impact. And if we can multiply our efforts by being in partnership, by being in community and creating unity, we're making way more impact that way than attempting to be an island.
So if I understand you correctly, and this is, sort of where I think we're going with this, if we're willing to embrace our own egos and put them on the table, then we have an opportunity to actually build faith with each other.
Mhm.
And how does that look? How does that happen? From a standpoint of, you know, we have an objective. We want to, create something bigger than what exists
Mhm.
right now. Um, what is it in your mind that, really builds community and partnership from the standpoint of being able to, put your ego out there and then put it to the side and really build faith?
I love the way you set that up, by the way. So, being the coach that knows this process, I love the way you just did that. So, I have to totally call that out of all of our coaches listening into this audience of the process of the joy of learning community and identity and all the fun parts so that we walk through walking people through seeing other perspectives and the joy that I recognize is that there's a willingness to say I'm going to trust you and I'm going to learn how to I'm going to and I think this is true for everybody. We do that in increments.
Mm.
We put a simple little thing out on the table, and then we put another thing out on the table, and we see what happens with that. Because a lot of us don't operate off of what we call blind faith. Some of us operate off of way too much blind faith and get burned by it, and I've been there as well. And yet, I think there's an opportunity for each person that and I use an example. I got the privilege of being a facilitator for an entrepreneurs development group for a chamber, and it's a powerful opportunity. What we're working on in building executive roundtables and uh, of bringing business owners together, a free opportunity there where people would get to see and experience the opportunity to share a little and see how the other people responded. And people would watch me facilitate that. And I just showed up as a vessel. I showed up laying out my skills on the table and saying, let me help you. Let me be a resource, kind of what you're talking about earlier. And as they got to see that, then they got the opportunity to say, I want to learn more. I want to talk to you more. And so when we're willing to put that gift and that offering on the table, if you will, then other people get to decide, oh, I want to know more about that, right? And then you get to have more conversation. You get to have more opportunity of saying, okay, what are you willing to put on the table? And then how are we going to align this and still respect and honor each other and show care and value and make sure we build those, it's kind of like if you've ever played dominoes or, the when you I love having one of my team exercises I love to do is give people decks of cards or 3x5 cards and let them build houses together and find out how well they do not stand up if they don't build them well. Right.
Yeah.
And they don't realize how much communication is required, how much leadership's required, how many different thought processes they have to go through to build together. And there's opportunity to learn how to build that trust, how to trust what giftings each person brings to the table. I think that would be a perfect example of that.
I think you did a great job of answering that question. I'm going to wrap up by asking you, what is the missing ingredient between, overcoming ego and leading with faith? But there's a missing ingredient that you talked about. I heard it, but, you know, I'm going to quiz you on it now. What is the missing ingredient to really building that community and partnership, even at the individual level? Because you literally touched on it, one person at a time, that you get the
Mhm.
privilege to build that partnership with.
Well, I don't know that it's a missing agreement. It's a misperceived ingredient. Is I think it comes back into Is there trust? Is there value? Is there res- res- uh, exchange value, if you will? Is there a awareness of how do I know if I put this on the table that there's going to be a duplication, a multiplication, etc. Because I think so many people don't recognize how many gifts and talents they can bring to the table, and how much those gifts and talents would be multiplied by being in partnership, by being in community, and having that opportunity to build that trust and that value and relationship.
So, so it's an exponential multiplication of, once you are willing to put your ego aside and have faith in just trying to build a community with other people, that your impact and your vibrating, if I'm hearing you correctly, to use your your
He's a quick learner. Love it.
you're you're getting on the same frequency with them, and that resonates, and now you have that much greater ability to impact others and build it all together. And um does that create, I just this is more a curiosity, this is a curious question I'm going,
Hmm.
does that create the love, or was the love always there from the original person?
That's a wonderful question. And the we get to greet this day with love in our heart if we remember some of our framework. And we get this opportunity to recognize that we bring love to the table. And so love ideally is always there. Yet I would also add that there is an opportunity to recognize that each person gets a way of expressing themselves. Each person gets a way of, and where one person may operate extremely well in this community, they may operate better in another community or whatever it may be, and based off of what their passion and their love is about. Doesn't mean that their love's any different. It means that it's an awareness. And it's interesting you say that, because I think that's the where our community is at right now, is that they think that that there's a difference of opinion, so therefore the love can't be there. That's not true. Love can completely be there. It's just a matter of what camp you want to be in, right? And how you're going to best be successful in that camp.
Yeah, no, I
Going back to that tribe concept.
I agree with you. And from my perspective, in wrapping up, I would agree with you that, I think that the love is always there. Because beyond putting your ego aside and leading with faith, you have to have the love internally to want to share with
Mm-hmm.
others. And the hope is that others are willing to put their ego aside so that the love can come out of them too. and
Mm-hmm.
and this is just my personal sort of summarization of what I think everything you said, is that our egos are the biggest obstacle to letting our love out.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at that from the greater perspective of not only how we lead and do business, as well as in our personal lives, but as a whole, in terms of society, that is our reframing of the fact that there's a lot of love in this world. We're
Amen.
just embracing it because we're stuck in our own egos. And if we put our egos aside, we would be able to receive as well as give and share a tremendous amount of love with each other. So I hope that I did a good job of summarizing.
It was perfect, and it leads to our bite to walk away with.
Yeah.
Is our opportunity is to determine how our ego, and that, I mean, it almost be a big old elephant, right? So let's knock it down to a smaller bite. uh and when I have an opportunity to be a island or a community, where can my ego be put aside to show up with a love or gifting or talent to add value?
Yeah.
Maybe the great bite to walk away with.
And from my end, it's the same question, just slightly differently. How does your ego, and this is for our listeners to ask themselves, how does your ego prevent you from sharing your love as well as receiving love from others? So
And the vision that we all want to own.
yeah, think on
To
that.
wrap it all.
Well, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you besides addressing the elephant in the room?
Yes, our podcast, Addressing the Elephant in the Room, at onelightahead.com, onelightacademy.com, and then we will be building many other resources for them in the future. What about you, Mr. Jason?
Very exciting. And everybody, you can find me at jasonsaffordllc.com, exceptionalresultsnow.com, and winningwithexceptionalism.com, which is my latest book. April, thank you so much for the time. As always, you are magnificent. If I haven't said it before, let me say it again so that everybody knows how magnificent you really are.
Okay, Mr. Fabulous. Have an amazing day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next episode.
Take care.